Good afternoon and welcome to this month's show. I'm Luke McCormack. During today's show, we will discuss best practices with machine learning and artificial intelligence strategies in the federal government. With me on today's show are Nan Mulchandani, Chief Technology Officer, Joint Artificial Intelligence Center, Department of Defense. Sunil Mahaduri, Acting Chief Technology Officer, U.S. Customs and Border Protection. Rachel Martin, Director of Artificial Intelligence, Automation and Augmentation, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. Dr. Gil Alterovitz, Director of National Artificial Intelligence Institute, Department of Veterans Affairs. Henry Sowell, Chief Information Officer, Cloudera Government Solutions. Nick Saki, Principal Technology Strategist for Public Sector, Pure Storage. And John Dillon, Chief Executive Officer at Aerospike. Well, we're talking about artificial intelligence. We're talking about machine learning. There's billions of IoT devices out there. We're hearing about yottabytes and bronobytes and certainly very advanced ways to transmit, store, and process data. And we've really entered into this age of performing artificial intelligence and machine learning, quite frankly, like never before. Let's start with you, Nan, over at the JAIC, as they call it. A lot of stuff going on over there. We're learning about JAIC 2.0 and the Joint Common Foundation. Sounds like you got a lot of cool stuff going on there. Give us a top line state of the state.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Well, as you said, there's just an absolutely a ton of stuff going on. I mean, AI is such a broad area and space that it's hard to speak about it in kind of one way, right? It's not a single technology. It's not a single set of algorithms. It's a wide technology space and then the implementation space as well. So the way we're approaching the problem is multi-dimensional. So let me sort of try to quickly take you through those.
Sure.
First is really understanding and differentiating between mature and emerging parts of AI. So when you think of data types, things like text or natural language processing or other sort of data types, we feel that many of the algorithms there are ready to scale. These are things that you can implement all day long, with great business return. But as you get to some of the more interesting and harder things like full motion video object detection and things, those are still in research land. But at the same time, we're also now applying these things to things like tactical edge and warfighting, all the way from business intelligence operations to warfighter health, to humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, to predictive maintenance, to warfighting. So the scope and scale of it is very hard. So what you've really got to do is take the mature parts and focus on implementing those very quickly to get the big wins. What that also does is helps you build out the infrastructure and the data pipelines that you need to enable a lot of the other cool AI stuff to happen. And one of the jokes that I always have is, even though it sounds really cool to be at the DoD doing AI, most of the work that we end up doing is actually sewer and plumbing work. So, this is kind of a roto-rooter job, but it sounds really cool. But you have to lay those pipes and foundation before you can get to the really cool piece. And the last thing I'll throw in there is around infrastructure and the Joint Common Foundation. So the other big job for the JAIC is that we ourselves don't go to war. So our job is to enable every other part of the DoD to be effective. So a lot of our work that we do is building the foundational elements, like I talked about, the data elements, the infrastructure elements. And the JCF is built as a way of opening up and democratizing access to compute and data for our average, warfighter or DoD employee to bring an AI project. And we call them sort of citizen data developers or citizen data scientists to come in and do their work, which then opens up an entire, set of folks who are actually working on AI as well.
Yeah, you've really gone from this sort of SEAL Team 6 mode of spot sort of solutions to broadening that up and out and making all those capabilities available, as I like to say, sort of the pliers and the wires part of this thing, and making sure you enable the entire ecosystem there, which is fantastic to see that level of maturity happening over there at the JAIC. Sunil, how about it? Customs and Border Protection, a lot of activity going on over there right now. I know you all are introducing AI and ML in a lot of different ways. Give us a top line state of the state.
Sure, absolutely. Hello, everybody. Sunil from CBP. I think Nan was right on, as to very similar to what Nan mentioned as to what we are doing also in that space within CBP. So I would classify from CBP perspective for AI machine learning into three or four broad areas, right? So as you know, we are the largest law enforcement agency in the country. I mean, people will be surprised, 65,000 people keeping the country safe. There's nothing more important than that. So because of that, we are also we do ingest a lot of data from not only data which we generate within CBP. Our job is to keep the borders open and legal travel and legal trade. That's our main job. So because of that, we do generate a lot of data, and we also ingest data from other agencies, which I can't go into that, but I'm just saying a lot of agencies also sending us data. Because of that, we do have tons of data which we can which we try and figure out as to what is going to happen next, right? So currently, and even before, our main job was, hey, just make sure you're doing some transactional data comes in, you're doing processing of that, and you move on. But that is changing dramatically for us too. So AI machine learning is one of the core competencies for us. And way we are doing that is I've divided that into like a few parts. So if you look at data in general, it can divide into like data engineering component, but like Nan mentioned, keeping the data ready so that somebody can consume that. There's a data science component to that, where you're looking the scientists creating the models and the machine learning models you're building on top of that. So we have component of that also. But the third one which is important, is the operational piece, and that's where we are going into, and that's where the challenges are. And we are seeing, I'll give you an example of, think about the autonomous driving cars, right? So these cars, when you're driving, it has to come to a stop sign. When you see a stop, it's supposed to stop. So there are a bunch of cameras who are doing the work for that, and you're collecting the data together. But ultimately, the whole car has to work. The brake has to work so that you come to a stop, right? So that's one of the components we're looking at. Operational thing, I think, where the challenges are for us, I feel. We have also created what is a center of excellence, center of innovation for AI and machine learning. And the reason we have done that is we did not have any standards for doing annotating data or tagging data. So we are in the process of doing that. So think about, like Luke mentioned, with respect to the IoT devices, we have non-intrusive inspections from the border perspective. We collect a lot of data there, but if we tag the data correctly and annotate data correctly, including to create models on top of that, becomes an important for us.
Lot of moving. Excuse me, I'm sorry.
No, exactly. A lot of moving parts and
a lot of moving parts going on.
And that's where we have challenges right now, Luke, because we are finding operational piece is where the difficult piece is. Collecting data, everything else is easier. We have lots of companies, a lot of different cool companies we work with who have off-the-shelf products which we can use. Sure. At the end of the day, the operational piece, the data, if you are putting in the data which you're collecting is not useful anymore, you are pretty much, you're pretty much giving wrong information to our operators. So that's
absolutely, why to make sure it's you collect it all and that it's very accurate. A lot of moving parts over there. CBP being right smack in the middle of the economy of United States of America, quite frankly, and globally. Rachel, how about over at National Geospatial and Intelligence Agency, NGA? I know there is just an absolutely incredible amount of data that you all process over there and collect, and I'm sure you're doing all kinds of stuff in the AI arena.
Yes, of course. And it's interesting. Certainly one of our big challenges is that volume of data, not just, of course, the GeoInt capabilities that the US government owns, but really the proliferation of commercial options in this area. We're, I think, at an inflection point where we simply can't keep up with the amount of information that we're receiving, whether it's still imagery or as non-referenced motion video. There's just too much of it for us to be able to rely on humans to continue to process. And so investment in AI technologies, or as we call them at NGA, AAA, AI automation and augmentation, is really a cornerstone of the director's strategy for achieving what he calls our moonshot. And, but I'll say it's interesting, you think about what NGA receives for data, and of course we immediately go to imagery or to pixels as the primary kind of data that we need to manage. But honestly, there's actually a huge realm of other kinds of information, other kinds of data, less structured data that we still also need to manage. I don't think we're unique to DoD or the federal government in that respect. Beyond our role, in terms of imagery, of course, we have other responsibilities that we have to meet. A good example is aeronautical publications. We're responsible for updating something around 250,000 pages of updates to aeronautical instructions every month, and for DoD and for other aviation related agencies in the federal government. And that's a tremendous amount of text to go through. So, I think it's important to highlight that it's not just an imagery, it's not just a motion problem set that we're dealing with, but we also have unstructured data challenges, just like I think everybody else does as well.
Wow, I never knew that you all were involved with that type of aeronautical stuff. That's interesting, very fascinating. Perhaps we'll hear more about that. Gil, how about over at VA? I know there's a whole bunch of activity going on over there. I think every veteran is delighted to hear that you're using these advanced technologies to sort of further that capability and deliver those services. Tell us what's happening at VA.
Yes, so there's a lot going on, and I think when we think about some of the ways that we're going about looking at that and leveraging that, we're creating and leveraging the national strategy. So that's involving collecting and creating different use cases. There's the data analytics work group of the Data Governance Council has been a way to engage and work toward an AI strategy as well, and to gather inputs from different offices and work together. There's also recently been a framework on trustworthy AI that came out nationally, and that across agencies, and we're defining that for what it means and how it can be leveraged regarding veterans and use cases there. So there are kind of three areas that we're working on overall and across different offices that making progress in that I've seen in the last few months that are going to enable AI going forward, and these include a number of different ways and platforms for computing, which is important, for artificial intelligence, so that different types of use cases can be taken on compared to what may have been possible in the past. Another area is developing the workforce, both internally as well as recruiting from externally. That's very important to actualizing and then eventually implementing these results. And of course, as was mentioned by one of the panelists, data is quite important, and information derived from that data. And so leveraging that within the VA and finding ways of doing so that protects the privacy of veterans, whether it be when that data and different models are used around these different use cases, is important as well. And then as we look forward, there's a number of different new approaches and research going on into how those can be used, and then in making sure that work can go very seamlessly into piloting and deploying, so that those benefits can be seen as soon as possible. We've stood up the AI Tech Sprint as one way to do that, to work with industry on priority issues for veterans and with veterans input, and also a veteran engagement board. So those are some of the areas that we're starting to make progress on, and seeing some initial results as well.
Fascinating. A lot of activity going on over at VA, and certainly as we talked about, a lot of data being created, which certainly has to be transmitted, certainly has to be stored, has to be processed and protected properly. And I know that some of our partners are in the middle of doing that. Henry, how about over at Cloudera? I know you're part of that solution to make that available for these agencies. What are you seeing across the spectrum here?
Yeah, everything that the panelists have said so far hits home for me, right? We're maniacally focused on mission impact, and so when you look at the full data management lifecycle that you have to do to be able to feed a proper data science practice, it's quite complex. So how do you manage scale? How do you manage ingest? How do you make sure that you're prepared for data engineering? And like Rachel said, you have a variety of different pieces. So a lot of point solutions can address a part of that, but how do you bring it together? How do you ensure that it's governed and secured? These are all things that we're really focused on. I think one of the interesting things that we've recently done here in the last 6 months, we had a major partnership with NVIDIA to bring GPUs and help bring scale to that with our platform. And we're working with a government agency right now as a high priority item to take their existing machine learning training workloads and see what we can do. And we've already seen a 3 to 5x improvement in performance. And when you really start thinking about mission, that is actually just time to value, right? Like how do we iterate quicker? Because when you look at a lot of these production workloads, very few are actually making it to production. You're talking about 35% actually make it to production. So how do you shorten that cycle so that you can continue to iterate and be successful? And that's some of our biggest focus right now.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of exciting things going on over there, and I'm glad to see that all this contribution going into enabling the ecosystem. Nick, how about over at Pure Storage? Undoubtedly, you all must be on fire over there trying to store all this stuff properly, have high-speed access back into that capability. Tell us what's happening. What do you see from your vantage point?
Thanks, Luke. We recognized several years ago that the needs for dynamic data service in an AI-driven enterprise were going to be radically different than what legacy technologies had heretofore been able to deliver. The scale, the volume, the velocity, the variety of data service and data access patterns and artificial intelligence infrastructures is simply radically different in terms of scale and velocity compared to legacy database and virtualization workloads. So we created, along with NVIDIA, an infrastructure platform called AIRI, or Artificial Intelligence Ready Infrastructure, specifically suited to the types of machine learning and deep learning data access patterns. And data and AI architectures and machine learning operations is highly dynamic. A storage array isn't someplace where you dump data and it's never seen or heard from again. I think that if anything, the artificial intelligence era has taught us that data is the new oil. And what we've built is a refinery for actually accelerating the time to value and the time to utility of that data to improve AI algorithm training and, of course, shortening the timeline to production. So we're very pleased that that message has, and that ability has resonated across the federal government and resulted in the adoption of dedicated platforms for doing this kind of work. And we're seeing that trend broadly across the entire industry, or really the entire operational space for enterprise infrastructure. In this architecture, data service has to be incredibly fast and agile, but it also has to be almost invisible. You want to get the infrastructure out of the way so data scientists can actually focus on building models, about delivering capability, about iterating the models, and training the AI. So you need a better mousetrap to do this type of thing.
Right.
One more thing we've seen, and really the last thing, is this effort has really emphasized that the need for infrastructure and data movement has to easily span on-premises infrastructure and utility computing infrastructure, or cloud. So you have to build a set of data services within the architecture, or leverage them, so that you can seamlessly move your algorithms to the workload, or algorithms to the data, or move the data to the algorithms. It's much more efficient to move the algorithms to the data than it is to try and do the reverse, simply because of data gravity. So that's been our focus, is how do we enable this? And we've had tremendously positive response from a number of customers within the national security space across the DoD. And of course, we've been very successful in biomedical research and in other areas. And we're just very proud to have seen this coming and created the capacity for addressing this new type of workload.
As you should be, and I tell you, it's very important. We seem to have moved away from, the data scientists trying to wrestle and get themselves into an environment to actually perform the role of a data scientist and really just wake up and do the job, so to speak, which I think is fantastic. Definitely shows a level of maturity. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, and we were just going across the top line, state of the state. John, tell us about Aerospike. What is Aerospike? How do they fit into the ecosystem here? And what are you seeing across the community?
Yeah, it's a great question. The Aerospike is a database engine that makes a lot of AI and machine learning actionable. And we fundamentally are dealing with a problem set that's pretty unique. The internet essentially has scaled the issues around data and how to use data effectively in ways I think we all knew it was coming, but it's just hit us like a sledgehammer. And most organizations have a lot of data that's been collected over the years, and then they have data that's coming in the moment right now. And fundamentally, there's lots of different ways you can use data, but you try to extract information from it that can be slowly extracted, or you try to deal with data that's new and deal with it in real time. And the issue is going from the edge back to the core. And that's the issue that Aerospike facilitates. As it was mentioned earlier, you've got a huge ingestion problem. If you think about ingestion problem, one of the IoT applications we're working on deals with an ingestion rate of 12 to 15 terabytes a second. That's an awful lot of data to sift through. And fundamentally, you can use algorithmic decisioning engines, and their job is to decide what's the next best action. And we're talking about decisions being made in less than an eye blink. And for people who don't think in terms of milliseconds, an eye blink is 300 milliseconds. So you need to have a data engine that can basically handle transactions in microseconds. And that's just not where the technology's been. That's what Aerospike can do from the edge and back to the core. But some of the other issues that are being discussed today, it's very, very complicated to take some of the old technology that's good, combine it with new technology, and make the whole system fit together so you can improve your intimacy with your constituency, provide a better service, and whether it's with the VA, whether it's Department of Defense, it really doesn't make any difference. So that's kind of where we fit in this.
Thank you, John. The volume and the speed that you're describing there is absolutely making my head spin. It's really, and you raise a good point about trying to take some of this advanced technology and merge it with the current technology and making sure it all comes together. Well, we always like to talk about a specific example. And Rachel, I'm going to ask you to give us a specific example over there at NGA. You already talked about some cool stuff that you all are doing over there in regards to something that's you're currently doing, something that's in the hopper in regards to artificial intelligence and machine learning.
Sure. So I'll go back to the example I actually referenced earlier, because I think it's a really great example of working in partnership, with industry and really applying some best practices to a problem set that is one that, again, as I mentioned, I think is not unique to us, and that is just the proliferation of unstructured text-based data that we all deal with on a routine basis. So the problem that I had referenced earlier is this responsibility that NGA has to update aeronautical publications. And just to give you a scope of what we're talking about, is information from approximately 200 foreign nation civil aviation programs. So
Wow.
we're not only dealing with text-based data in English, we're dealing with text-based language and occasionally in other languages as well. And like I said, that averages out to about 250,000 pages that our analysts had to review every month in order to make sure that there were no updates that would affect the safety of navigation, safety of aeronautical activity for DoD. DoD is responsible for doing this every 28 days, and it supports 13,000 aircraft. So the potential damage from getting it wrong is pretty significant. And as a labor intensive process, it's also ripe for potential mistakes. NGA's AAA team partnered with Amazon Web Services to pilot a text extraction machine learning model to start automating this activity. And ironically, COVID kind of helped in this respect. Everybody was home under quarantine. We weren't operating our normal classified systems. And so we were really able to innovate by accessing technology, in an unclassified domain in a way I think perhaps we had not necessarily done in the past. And the initial pilot was really quite successful. It's continuing. We're looking at scaling at the moment to multiple other countries. We started with just a handful, and we're looking at something around 20,000 hours per year saved in analytic time. And something around in the order of millions of pages of text every year. So I think this was just a really great example of using an existing technology that was readily available in industry that we could bring in and immediately apply within very rapid order. I want to say they went through the pilot and prototyping in about 6 months or so. And so we look at that as a good example of where we can save our analysts time to work on the things that are most important, and let the machines do the work that is more routine.
Right. Take the robot out of the human, right? And let the human do their thing. And it's interesting, the COVID, sort of play has really unlocked a lot of solutions out there. It's really fun to see that. My head's just, I was shaking my head just, again, the volume of what you're describing there is absolutely incredible. Henry, how about at Cloudera? Can you give us an example of, a use case there that would be of great interest to the listening audience that you all have been involved in?
Yeah, one that I'm really proud of is our partnership with the Navy. We've been working closely with them for a number of years now on predictive maintenance for some of their airframes. And if you look at where we started, these aircraft have put out a huge amount of data all the time. And when that was first happening, a lot of the data was falling to the ground. It wasn't being leveraged for predictive analytics, for data science. It wasn't done pretty much anything. They would actually have people on, a private would come out and fill out a handwritten checklist, right? Did you do this thing? And the pilot says, no, right? I didn't do that thing. And what we ended up doing was leveraging the data where we could actually see the banks and turns and things that were happening while the vehicle was in the air. And then what does that do to parts that are happening in the aircraft? And so instead of being down for a month at a time for maintenance, what we were able to do is leveraging the data, realize that, hey, in 2 months you're going to need this part so that we can keep that bird in the air. So instead of a month down, you're talking about a week down for maintenance. And those predictive maintenance use cases have been really successful. We're excited about what we've done with the Navy. That's
fantastic. You just collect this data and crunch it and crunch it and crunch it, and you start to see these patterns. And all of a sudden, these pearls of wisdom start to come out, and you can make really good informed decisions. It's a great use case. So Neil, how about at U.S. Customs Border Protection? I know you have a lot of different activities. Give us one use case of something that you all are doing to keep us all safe.
Yes, sir, absolutely. Thank you. From CBP perspective, as I mentioned earlier, one of the pieces which we were not doing before was we're collecting a lot of data, but that data, as you said, is the kind of data we were collecting is changing, right? We mentioned about some of the NLP-based data, some of the data which was more video-centric data now, which we were not collecting a whole lot before. So think about some of the cameras and everything at the border, which we are collecting information from. So one thing we started doing, an example that I want to give you is that we started to annotate and tag the data now, so that we can look at the metadata on top of that and collect information and build some models on top of those of the data we have, so that we can figure out, okay, what is the, as to, I can't go into some detail, but I'm just saying is that we're able to assess things better moving forward. And also it kind of helps our agents and officers to look at certain peak times on a certain different times as to what that looks like. And it also, the thing is, this also plays into another piece, which is called the data ethical data or ethical AI, which is also getting an interesting position within CVP. We want to make sure we do everything correctly, and think about biometric pieces, right? We're collecting biometric information. How do we make sure our biometric information is completely safe and and secure and things like that? So our models are built like that, so that whatever data we are collecting as of right now is was pretty much transactional, but that is changing into more and more where we are using NLP, and we are also using video-based technologies. Other piece I want to tell you quickly, Luke, is another example we have is we're using also RPA, robotic process automation intelligence, so that one example where we think about if you have email and email, you run a bot on email, and you can actually bring all your common email, which you read a lot more on top of your inbox, right? So which is helping our execs and other folks to take advantage of that. So those are a few examples we're doing at CVP, lots to go. And recently, as you know, the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence came out with a final report. A lot of good information to read from there. We're learning from that and moving on.
Fantastic. Glad to see sort of the all of government coming together and getting all the great ideas and bringing them to the top, and some fascinating use cases there for sure. Nick, how about at Pure Storage? Can you give us an example of a solution that you all have been involved in that's really changed the game, so to speak, in regards to any of these agencies?
The explosion in biomedical research, patient care, and obviously disease tracking and COVID has significantly ramped up a lot of the data efforts, both on the cure finding as well as the patient tracking across the country. And this actually ties into obviously several of the agencies that are here on the call. We partnered with Health and Human Services, who reached out to us to try and help address the explosion in data growth that they'd had, both structured and unstructured, as they were trying to wrap their arms around what this disease was, how it behaved, unraveling its RNA, and then of course, how it was impacting the population. So when you need really fast, really powerful, scalable dynamic data service, you have to start looking at newer technologies that lend themselves readily to those, volume, velocity, and variety challenges. And that is really one of the reasons why, solid state storage is absolutely critical to this type of endeavor. And again, it's data movement. You have to be able to integrate cloud-based data storage platforms, cloud-based data, I should say, with your on-premises infrastructure and seamlessly interchange that data back and forth. So we work together with Amazon on their Amazon Outpost solutions to be able to create an on-premises edge type computing capability, as well as shoring up the on-premises infrastructure of HHS to address those particular requirements, and then support the data integration efforts across agencies, not just integration, but data distribution. So there's a ton of customers for this stuff. So the data has to be able to move seamlessly from organization to organization, and it has to lend itself readily to the processing capabilities that those organizations have. So that's, I kind of like to think of what we do as we're the freight train of data. We're what gets it to market. And enables the applications to adapt readily without having to replumb everything in order to take advantage of new data or new data types, new data services. So again, the focus then becomes not on the infrastructure, but enabling the application development, which really drives, how well can the agencies do their mission. To Rachel's point, you're offloading a tremendous amount of work from analysts, as an example, when you can let machines start doing the initial triage or discovery of relevance of particular data. Well, intelligence is a knowledge-based function. The outcomes are often unique, but the processes that go into it are often very general. So everybody's trying to look for answers. Everybody's trying to solve problems, and our job is to help make that happen.
And the reality is, if those freight trains aren't delivering that data, then we're not processing any AI, and that's for sure. Well,
Exactly.
we've talked a couple of times about health, so I'm going to throw it over to you over at VA, Gil, and give us an example of some activities that are going on over there. One example, if you would, of where you're using this AI capability.
Yes, yeah, there are a number of different examples, really. But if you think about it, it's in the healthcare area, as you were alluding to, there's a number of things, all the way from kind of the the plumbing, as Nan was mentioning earlier, to the, to actual diagnoses and so forth. So there is, for example, natural language processing that's being used in terms of submitting and processing different forms that allowing people to, and allowing essentially the detection if someone qualifies for certain medical coverage. We're seeing that one as well. There's collaboration with the Department of Energy, also on new AI approaches that are being applied and leveraged for diseases like cancer, cardiovascular disease, and mental health, as a currently ongoing as a pilot as well. So there's a number of different use cases going all the way from research to pilot to production use. What's interesting is kind of like moving that across those different use cases and moving them forward. So yeah, that's kind of
absolutely great use case there. John, how about at Aerospike? Give us one example of where you all have implemented something or been part of implementing something that is enabled part of this ecosystem.
Yeah, I'll provide one example without being very specific, and this is essentially in credit card processing, which is not necessarily related to the federal government, but the intimacy and the accuracy of doing something like that in real time. We have a client that when a business transaction comes in, like you're buying a latte at Starbucks, some guy is standing at the counter, your credit card's in the machine. And this is the thing you might be surprised, a single business transaction has to go full circle in 750 milliseconds. So that's the 2.5 eye blinks. And in this particular case, the algorithmic decisioning engine has to decide, is it fraud, is it not fraud? And you've only got about less than a half a second to make that decision. And these are decisions made under conditions of uncertainty. You don't know everything. So this particular client has a massive data store, combs through it in slow, sometimes glacier speed to find nuanced relevance, finding intelligence that then you can push back to the edge to make it actionable. So when that business transaction comes in, believe it or not, the algorithm does 250 database reads and writes, turns that whole thing around, and in so doing was able to reduce the incidence of fraud by 30x, 3,000%. And it's because they used more data. And in this particular case, they started out with only about 10 terabytes of data under the real-time decisioning engine. And they've moved that up to close to 200 terabytes of data, all being actionable in a split second. And that's a remarkable use of data in this sort of transitioning period of time where civilian and government agencies are really trying to harness the data they have. It's really important stuff.
Wow, that talk about real time, that is quite impressive. Well, we're going to take another short break and we'll be back in just a moment. You're listening to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. Welcome back to the Federal Executive Forum on Federal News Network. We're talking about AI and machine learning, and we've been talking about specific use cases. And I certainly want to throw it up to the Jake and ask Nan, give us an example of a use case that the Jake has been able to implement that has been of the betterment of DoD or the community at large.
Sure. Actually, let me give you a couple more than one because we've been very busy. So the first one I'll talk about is, so we've got basically 6 verticals, 30 plus products across 6 verticals that we're building. So we've got use cases across the whole gamut there. The first one I'll highlight is business process transformation as a vertical, which actually our very own Rachel Martin actually ran before she went over to the NGA. So one of our absolute successes, product called Game Changer, which is really focused on think of policy and text documents and being able to build intelligence and reasoning on top of it. Got 2,000 plus users on the system, and it's actually multiplying like rabbits out there in terms of new clones of Game Changer being applied to different use cases. So just a phenomenal use case there. Joint information warfighting, basically We used to call that cybersecurity. We've got a product called Mad Hat that's been deployed really around network intrusion detection and working. We've got joint logistics. We've got a project Salus that we actually built in the early days with Northcom and the Guard around predictive capabilities in terms of resource shortages and other pieces there. We've got an augmented reality microscope that we built in working with the Defense Health Agency around detection for 8 types of cell problems and diseases based off of the 55 million tissue samples that the Defense Health Agency actually has, one of the largest troves of data out there. And we're basically mining that information and data to enable that. Joint force protection, we have a project called Gargoyle that's focused on full motion video object detection at low altitude. I can keep on going, actually. The core point that I'd make here, though, is that the products that the JAIC builds are really intended to be Pathfinder projects that develop core IP and force us to build things like data pipelines and infrastructure and things that we can then proliferate across the DoD. So our core goal is, once we've figured something out, like Game Changer is a great example, is to basically build that IP and give it away so it can get scaled out there. Because at the core point, I mean, as you've seen across this whole discussion, pretty much all of the base layers of problem sets are pretty much the same, right? The vendors that are on the call, I mean, are really providing us with all the great technology that we can leverage and build, but we have to go through the data processing and the other basic work to enable all these other pieces. So the products that we're building at the JAIC are really intended as enabling us to build core IP. And over time, the JAIC is really now turning its work towards, instead of doing product development, really enabling all the agencies to go do this themselves, right? Teaching them how to fish. And different ones are at different layers of maturity. I mean, Rachel's now gone off and she's got the NGA under great control. But then there are other agencies that we need either JAIC alumni to go over or, to help them basically enable this stuff there.
Really, I mean, you just blew me away when you were talking about AR for microscopes, and just to think about the capabilities here is absolutely phenomenal. Well, since you've called out Rachel a couple of times, Rachel, let's start with you. Top priority for this year, and love to see this cross-pollination of talent across the community, by the way.
Thanks for the kind shout out, Nan. I've definitely, I definitely was, indoctrinated well at the JAIC, because my top, our top priority for this year is really getting our data house in order. As we've worked through mission sprints, which is our prototyping efforts, and some of the other lines of effort that we have, what we've noticed is at the heart of every problem is usually some sort of data, something related to data. And so for us, it's not just a problem of data in-house. We also need to then be able to deliver that data to decision makers and to warfighters, and we have to do it quickly and accurately. And frequently we have to do it to very remote locations. And so our problem is somewhat complex in the way we manage and deliver data. So that's one of our top priorities for this year. And the other one is also this idea of taking these areas where we've identified challenges such as data, and building out an enterprise infrastructure that supports that. I think we've had a lot of great success with smaller projects, but taking those successes and being able to make them enterprise, deliver enterprise capabilities is another top focus, and that includes things like algorithm governance, all the way to enterprise data management practices. So those are our core focus areas for the coming year.
Hearing a lot about framework and ecosystem so that you can get up that value chain and stay there. So Neil, how about top priority for you in regards to machine learning and AI this year?
Yeah, no, thank you, Luke. Yes, definitely. I think the challenges we are facing is very similar to what everybody is talking on the panel here. I think someone mentioned about 35% of the project which are working on AI machine learning actually goes into production. So we are very similar to that. We are trying to change that model and trying to put some of these models into production. It's not easy, like people are mentioning the data challenges and ingest challenges, creating the model challenges. So what we are seeing is, as we have mentioned, earlier is we are creating what is a center of excellence for all of CBP for AI machine learning. And I think we are hoping there, how do we the challenges we have there is we're trying to figure out what do we buy off the shelf or what do we develop ourselves. As you know, skill sets within the industry is not easy to find good data scientists, and very quickly there's a lot of demand for them. So if we are like everybody else is struggling to get the right skill set. So I'm hoping that moving forward, we can actually produce more and more of these products, I would say, either working through the industry or also working internally within our own skill sets. And I'm hoping that moving forward, that from broader perspective, what we are responsible for is that we make the main goal for us is to make our life easy for our operators. That's the number one goal. So whatever tools we give them has to work, has to be secure, and things like that. So challenges for us, Luke, I would say moving forward is how do we take the data, what we have, all the tools, what we have, actually make it operational. That's the number one challenge we have right now.
Right, and that talent challenge is always, talent management, always a big deal in any of these advanced technologies. Gil, how about at VA? Top priority for you this year?
Right, great question. So in terms of priorities this year, we're really focusing on collecting and understanding the different use cases around artificial intelligence that are ongoing, collecting and analyzing those use cases so that we can apply trustworthy AI to ensure that these use cases that end up being leveraged are developed to meet these principles. There's also certain areas that we're looking at the National Artificial Intelligence Institute at the VA, focus areas such as deep learning, explainable AI, privacy preserving AI, as I mentioned, trustworthy AI, and finally, multi-scale AI analysis.
A lot of activity going on over at the VA, all good stuff. Nan, how about your number one priority at the Jake this year? Got a lot of stuff going on over there.
Yeah, so we've got a number of number one priorities.
Give us your top dog.
So just like Gil said, I think the Jake's now about 2 years old, and we're now at a point where we feel we've had enough Pathfinder projects across a multi-dimensional set of data types and use cases and things to understand generally what the scope of the problem is. Congress just recently tasked the Jake with a pretty big job to inventory, just like Gil pointed out over at the VA, is to inventory what's actually going on in AI across the DoD. So one of the things we're working on very hard is once we have this inventory, we now understand, we're going to apply basically an intelligence layer on top of it of who's where, in terms of the maturity of different services and agencies, where we need to focus our attention in terms of either assistance or getting out of the way in other cases. And then there's a second thing of, I have a very big bias on sort of a lot of the work going on in the AI world today is what I really call sort of focus on narrow AI problems, right? So these are all the building block foundational areas around specific use cases or specific data types. The real interesting stuff for us at the DoD, I believe, comes in the second and third wave of really things around like modeling and simulation, reasoning and intelligence, which is on another dimension, if you may. And that's where we're starting to do work around things like, commanders, COA generation, or things like targeting and other pieces there, which become a lot more complicated. They're built on the basic sort of narrow AI building blocks, but deploying things like AI to the tactical edge in a denied, degraded environment, right? You're dealing with UAVs, with hardware, you're dealing with very sophisticated algorithms crammed onto a very small system with battery packs and limited CPU and memory, the communications models, et cetera. So these are all bigger problems that we have to think through that are really going to deliver sort of that next gen of stuff after we're done with the basic AI pieces. That's another big area. So we have to sort of chew gum and walk at the same time of getting the stuff done that's easy, but then setting ourselves up for the sort of next gen use cases that is really where I think the real exciting stuff comes.
Yeah, it sounds like the Jake 2.0 is in full form there. All right, well, we're going to wrap it up with this last question and talk about kind of paint a picture of the future, if you will. We're going to start with you, Sunil, over at Customs and Border Protection. You know, fast forward a couple of years, what does it look like out there in this environment? How do you see the use of AI and ML maturing inside of CBP to once again keep our country safe?
Absolutely, Luke. So what we're expecting is, I think the trend is moving very, very fast towards this model of AI machine learning. Every product you're looking at, every vendor we talk to, AI ML is the discussion point for everybody across the board. And so what we are seeing is that data in general is expected. The data, any format should be able to ingest, shouldn't matter. But the models we are expecting from, especially from the industry, is that they are providing us these some common element and some of those AI machine learning models, which can be applicable to across the board, right? We should be able to take it one area within CBP and move it somewhere else, and so that everybody looking at the same with the same eye, right? I'm a traveler. I also can also be an importer, also, right? How do we make sure that the same person is what we are looking at and what the person profile looks like across the board? Learn from that. Some of those data sets is what we are expecting, and the vendors have become extremely good now. We are seeing some of the companies we are working with, they are going toward this convergence of some of those data types, right? Earlier, if you have the buckets of data, you're doing transactional data, or you are doing non-structured data as to what that looks like, right? But now everything is combined together. It should not matter. We are creating these large delta lakes, and these lakes should be able to create the models for us. I'm hoping that becomes a norm more and more as we move forward. And our data strategy moving forward, CBP is also working towards that. So you will see some of those pieces. I'm hoping that, as I mentioned earlier, that we can take some of the data and make it more operational, help us for that perspective from the vendor community is what we are looking forward to.
Right. I love seeing this AI and ML capability sort of embedded in these partner solutions. John, you gave us some great examples of sort of what's going on out there and some of the capabilities that you're providing. What does it look like over the next couple of years? What are the customers signaling to you that we can expect to see in perhaps the next 2 years?
Well, there's a couple of issues that are happening all at the same time. There's the data provenance in AI that's really important, and yet at the same time, trying to make sure that you're sourcing the data from the right places so that you don't inject bias into the decision-making that a decisioning engine will make. And at the same time, you're trying to, if you will, delight your end user constituency, creating a greater degree of intimacy, approving a credit card transaction, routing the person to the right next session. You remember somebody, what do you know about them? What can you know about them? And pushing this back and forth from a core, with many, many petabytes of core data, taking and extracting that information and pushing it out to the edge to use it actionably in real time. And one just quick comment, in our personal lives, we don't compartmentalize the experience we get when I personally use the VA as a retired veteran, or when I'm doing an online banking transaction with my local bank. I don't care which vendor I'm dealing with or what service I get, but I expect them to be good. And this constant CI/CD thing, constant innovation and constant deployment is something that everyone is all about right now. And I think we're just pushing the beginning, I think. And I think the next 2 or 3 years is going to be really exciting.
I'm certainly excited about it. Nick, how about a Pure Storage? What are you seeing out there? You guys are doing a fantastic job laying down the technology, staying in front of the curve. What's it look like in a couple of years?
Well, we think what we see is that the rise of really data science and the focus on delivering outcomes is really changing how enterprises, every organization, federal government, commercial, et cetera, is really thinking about data. So what we're focusing on is this transition, or rather the rise in prominence of data management, data service integration, data as a service, and data infrastructure becoming a central pillar of AI-driven organizations, particularly with the rise of AI-driven organizations, because we're going to have to figure out strategies for implementing our data strategy and the mechanisms for doing that. So we're seeing a tremendous focus what are the speeds, protocols, et cetera, underpinning all of its data, wherever and whenever and however they want to. At the edge, at the core, and at the velocities that emerging 5G technologies, as an example, are going to deliver to agencies and organizations. So that's our focus going forward, is really how do we build a better framework for data integration from top to bottom.
Right, and staying ahead of that curve, and we really appreciate everything you're doing there. Henry, how about at Cloudera? What's it look like over the next couple of years? What are you all going to provide as far as that ecosystem to allow these agencies to do what they do?
Yeah, it's interesting, the path ahead. We talk to a lot of different government customers and work with them in different parts of where their journey is and where that's going, right? We see some that we have to get core fundamentals down, right? Data preparation, data engineering, that has got to get, and they've got to start at that ground level to make sure that machine learning AI is ready. So that's on their near-term roadmap. And I think the next is, how do you productionalize machine learning AI? So we talk about, 35% are only making it to production, right? That's kind of like what Nan was saying, those building blocks, right? You got to get those fundamentals down, whether it's come from data engineering, data warehousing, the full data pipeline, right? How do you collect it? How do you deliver it? How do you make sure that it's ready to go? All of those things, I think that productionalizing, I think that's the core of the near-term future, is getting that piece together, that full data management side managed, so that you're prepared for it. And then I'm really excited what Nan said, that third wave, right? And that's the pieces that, we're here at Cloudera focusing on, is how do we start doing, streaming AI? How do we start operating at the edge? How do we start making better decisions and doing something that is much more forward leaning? And I'm really excited about that over the next few years.
Really fusing and hardening that environment. So again, we can get up that value chain and really focus on these higher order capabilities. Gil, how about over at Veterans Affairs? If I'm a freshly minted vet in a couple of years, or a 30-year vet, what does that look like to me in a couple of years from now? What do you guys got cooking over there?
Right. So I think, I think a lot of the things that were said by the people at other agencies, we're going to see a number of those, whether it be, faster service, for veterans, whether it be more cost-efficient service, also better quality service. I think we'll see this especially in business processes at first. And with time, more and more throughout medical care. So at the VA, there are medical facilities across the country. Some are in rural areas, and there are different places where working at the edge may be beneficial for AI to deploy, where either network connectivity or other factors may play a role in transferring and transporting data and so forth. So there's a lot of those technologies can really make a difference in the upcoming years.
Fascinating. I'm sure everyone will look forward to that. Rachel, how about at NGA? What does it look like there in regards to a couple of years from now? What can we expect?
So NGA, of course, everyone knows, is an intelligence community agency, but it's also a combat support agency. And NGA's vision for the future is encapsulated in what we call the director's moonshot. And that's simply stated, and there's some keywords here that are worth focusing on. In 2 to 5 years, we will deliver trusted GEOINT with speed, accuracy, and precision, so that we can hold at risk forces our adversaries may deploy against us that threaten the United States and our allies. And that's within that broader goal or vision for the future is 4 focused initiative areas that we will be looking at to achieve that moonshot. And they're assured position, navigation, timing, and targeting. What do you do if GPS doesn't work? Mm-hmm. Accelerated tasking orchestration, data access and integrity, and analytic workflow modernization. Woven throughout all of these focus areas, of course, is an implicit understanding that AAA technologies, that AI, automation, augmentation, human machine teaming will be there to allow us to achieve in these areas. And so AAA, The Office, our focus over the next 2 to 5 years will be doing everything we can to accelerate the adoption of these technologies so that we can achieve the director's moonshot.
Fantastic. And I would encourage everyone to go out there and take a look at the moonshot description there. It sounds fantastic, and really looking forward to seeing that completely realized. Nan, how about at the Jake? What can we expect in a couple of years? Are we going to have a Jake 3.0, a 4.0?
Well, I guess we got to keep the version numbers.
I couldn't resist.
Yeah, it's funny. I spent 25 plus years in Silicon Valley before coming to the DoD. So, government service in the DoD is relatively new to me. So fundamentally, there's sort of two big things I'll talk about. One is some of the things I talked about in terms of the second and third wave of AI, the way we're sort of thinking about where it's going to get deployed. Obviously, AI is going to be everywhere in a couple of years, right? So it'll be like the internet or mobile devices, et cetera. It's ubiquitous. But the big areas of focus for us to set the seeds for what's coming is there's sort of a hyper-local focus on AI that I call autonomy. So when we're thinking of the tactical edge, that's really the investments in IP that we're building to allow things like AI for small unit maneuvers, for things with SOCOM or JSOC or other things where you've got units on the ground in a tactical edge deployment. What are all the AI pieces that are needed, and systems needed to enable that? The other big thing going on at the DoD are projects like JADC2, right? Joint All Domain Command and Control. We're redoing literally end-to-end the entire command and control structure, all the way from Rachel's, intel inputs, all the way to targeting and, basically a target, sensor to shooter type systems. So those are really where we're going to apply the sort of AI technology. Underpinning all this, what you find is we at the DoD, just like any other large enterprise out in the world, we have a huge amount of technical debt that we've accrued over the past 10 to 15 years. So our infrastructure model, and that includes data and other pieces, are unfortunately in a state that don't enable us to do rapid marginal cost development of software. So software in and of itself is a discipline, right? There are economics in terms of running software projects and how you deliver this at the right cost, at the right timing. And this discipline and understanding needs to be brought to bear because we operate at such scale. And so, for instance, today, I call this, I'm sort of well known in the DoD for talking about this, as sort of the snowflake architecture problem, right? So we've got hundreds and hundreds of little apps running around the DoD, but they're not integrated into platforms. And the stuff, for instance, that Rachel will be driving at the NGA, right, is GeoInt as a service. This model where we have all of these different services that are being delivered at scale, right, with the right, security, with the right uptime, with the right performance and other things. So the average AI developer or developer inside the DoD can write an app without having to spend millions of dollars, right? So the marginal cost has to go down over time. We just don't have the infrastructure for it. So with the backdrop of sort of autonomy and automation, the two big things, there's this infrastructure refresh and data refresh change that we need to go through. And if we can achieve these in the next couple of years, for us, that's the entire competitive game, which obviously is now focused on China and other peer competitors who are going to be driving the same level of technological changes in their infrastructure there.
Well, you've certainly laid the gauntlet down for a very interesting and very exciting couple of years ahead. So appreciate everything that you're doing. I want to thank all of you for taking the time out of your busy schedules today to join us for this program. We know how super busy everybody is these days. I'd like to thank our sponsors for supporting us on this show. I'd like to thank the good people here at the Federal News Network that make our program so successful and enjoyable. And most of all, I'd like to thank the listening audience out there that are tuning in every month. You've been listening to the Federal Executive Forum, part of the Federal News Network.